The morning light filtered through Venetian blinds, painting stripes across Eleanor's wrinkled hands as she carefully applied her lipstick coral pink, the same shade she'd worn for 40 years. At 72, she maintained the elegant posture of the ballet dancer she'd once been, though her movements had slowed with the passage of time. Her apartment in Boston was small but tasteful, filled with antiques and memories but conspicuously devoid of family photographs. Every Tuesday, Eleanor volunteered at the public library, reading to children. She had a particular way with them, her voice shifting and dancing through stories with the practiced ease of someone who'd crafted a performance out of everyday life. The children adored her, their eyes wide as she transformed ordinary tales into magical journeys. What they couldn't see was how Eleanor's gaze would sometimes drift beyond them, searching for a face that wasn't there, lingering on features that reminded her of someone she'd lost. Today, after story time, Eleanor's routine was interrupted by a notification on her phone, social media alert she'd set up years ago, but which had never before triggered. Someone had tagged her daughter's name online. After decades of silence, the digital universe had suddenly connected a dot that Eleanor had long ago abandoned. Her hands trembled as she tapped the screen. Her perfectly applied lipstick now smudged slightly at the corner of her mouth, a small imperfection in her carefully constructed facade. The notification revealed a graduation announcement for her granddaughter, Sophia Wilson, accepting a scholarship to Juilliard. Granddaughter with her same aquiline nose, her same artistic temperament. A granddaughter who had never known her existence. Eleanor slowly lowered herself onto a bench as the weight of choices, made half a lifetime ago, crashed down upon her weathered shoulders. Eleanor's apartment was a museum of carefully curated omissions. For every object displayed, there were dozens hidden away in boxes she rarely opened. The single glass of wine she permitted herself each evening was always consumed in the company of classical music, never silent. Silence invited thoughts she wasn't prepared to entertain. Her neighbors knew her as a pleasant private woman, who brought cookies to building meetings but never invited anyone into her home. They didn't know that beneath her polished exterior lay a landscape of regret, as fast she'd spent decades navigating around its edges. 34 years ago, Eleanor had been Eleanor Wilson, wife to respected Boston attorney Thomas Wilson, and mother to 8-year-old Rebecca. Their Tudor-style home in Brookline had been the envy of their social circle, their Christmas parties legendary. But behind closed doors, Eleanor had suffocated under the weight of social expectations and a marriage that had calcified into frigid politeness. The only warmth in her life had been Rebecca Precocious, sensitive Rebecca with her unruly curls and perpetual questions. The day everything changed had been unremarkable. Autumn leaves, a coffee meeting with the director of the community theater where Eleanor volunteered. Marco Rivero was Argentinian, a political exile and playwright who spoke of art as resistance and passion as a necessity. Their conversations stretched from afternoon into evening, their connection immediate and electric. In his presence, Eleanor felt parts of herself awakening that she had long ago buried. The dancer, the dreamer, the woman capable of desire. What began as an artistic collaboration evolved into clandestine meetings and whispered promises. Thomas grew suspicious as Eleanor became distracted, distant. Rebecca, perceptive beyond her years, sensed the seismic shifts occurring beneath the surface of her mother's carefully composed expressions. The memory that haunted Eleanor most frequently was Rebecca's face on that final morning, confused. Betrayed as Eleanor kissed her forehead, promised to call soon, and walked out the door with a single suitcase. She had convinced herself that it was temporary. She would establish herself in Buenos Aires with Marco and then send for Rebecca. She had not anticipated Thomas's ruthless legal maneuvers, the restraining order, the threats to expose Marco's political activities if she contested custody. By the time Eleanor could safely return to the United States, Rebecca was 16 and refused to see her. The occasional letters and birthday cards were returned unopened. Now, staring at the social media post, Eleanor traced the outline of Sophia's face on her screen. The young woman had Rebecca's eyes, but Eleanor's mouth. She played the cello, an instrument Eleanor had loved in her youth. The coincidence felt like a message across time. a thread connecting them despite everything that had been severed. With shaking fingers, Eleanor reached for a lacquered box on her bookshelf. Inside lay newspaper clippings, birth announcements discreetly collected over years. Snippets of Rebecca's life tracked from a distance. Marriage to Michael Chen, a professor of music theory. The birth announcement for Sophia 15 years ago. Reviews of Rebecca's performances with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Tomorrow was the graduation ceremony according to the Posta private high school in Cambridge, where Sophia had apparently flourished as a musical prodigy. Eleanor set down her wineglass, her decision crystallizing with the clarity that comes from decades of regret finding a possible path to redemption. The parking lot of Cambridge Preparatory Academy was filled with luxury vehicles and families. In their Sunday best, Eleanor sat in her rented car, hands clutching the steering wheel, though the engine had been off for 20 minutes. She had chosen a seat at the back of the auditorium, her heart thundering against her ribs with such force. She feared others might hear it. The program listed Sophia Chen as a featured soloist. When the young woman took the stage, cello in hand, Eleanor stopped breathing. The resemblance was uncanny, not just physically, but in the way Sophia tilted her head slightly before beginning to play. The same unconscious gesture Eleanor had made before every ballet performance decades ago. The music that followed Bach's cello suite. No. One flowed from her granddaughter's instrument with technical precision, but also with something more profound, an emotional intelligence that seemed impossible for someone so young. From her vantage point, Eleanor could see Rebecca in the front row, now 42, her once wild curls tamed into an elegant updo. Beside her sat a distinguished Asian American man, Michael, presumably his hand occasionally reaching for his wife's in gestures of easy intimacy. Their shared pride was visible in every line of their bodies as they watched their daughter perform. The family Eleanor had forfeited had created their own beautiful unit, complete and whole without her. They were not missing a piece. The realization was both devastating and strangely freeing. After the ceremony, Eleanor followed them from a distance, watching as they embraced Sophia. As friends and teachers congratulated them, Rebecca's laugh drifted across the courtyard, a sound Eleanor had not heard in 34 years. She had imagined this moment differently, had rehearsed approaching them, introducing herself. But faced with the reality of their happiness, her carefully prepared words evaporated. Later that evening, in her hotel room, Eleanor reviewed the graduation program she'd kept. Listed among Sophia's acknowledgments was gratitude to her cello teacher, Madame Katharina Petrova, for showing me what it means to play from the soul. The name triggered a memory. Katerina had been a contemporary of Eleanor's during her dancing years, another expatriate artist who had found a home in Boston's creative community. Perhaps there was another way to bridge the chasm, not directly, crossing it in one dangerous leap, but building a path, stone by patient stone. Eleanor pulled out her phone and searched for Katerina Petrova, discovering she taught master classes at the Boston Conservatory. A connection tenuous but real to the granddaughter who shared her artistic blood. As the night deepened, Eleanor removed an old photograph from her wallet, the last picture taken of her with Rebecca, their smiles preserved in amber. She placed it beside the graduation program, the past and present in conversation across the silent hotel room. In the morning, she would begin the delicate work of constructing a bridge across 34 years of absence. The Boston Conservatory building stood like a testament to artistic perseverance amid the city's more modern structures. Eleanor waited on a bench outside, while watching young musicians coming and going with instrument cases in the unburdened gait of those yet to make life-altering mistakes. When Katerina Petrova emerged still regal at 78, her silver hair swept into a bun secured with ornate pins. Eleanor's throat tightened with the strange sensation of seeing one's past materialize unexpectedly. Katerina recognized her immediately, despite the decades. Her embrace was brief but genuine, followed by coffee in a nearby cafe where the ambient noise provided a blanket of privacy. Eleanor had rehearsed a casual approach to mentioning Sophia, but in Katerina's penetrating presence, such artifice felt impossible. So, the older woman said, stirring her tea with deliberate movements, "You have discovered your granddaughter as my student?" The directness was both startling and relieving. Katerina had always possessed an almost uncanny perceptiveness. Eleanor nodded, emotion temporarily stealing her voice. She has your hands, Katerina continued, and your discipline. But her mother's fire? She studied Eleanor's face. Rebecca does not speak of you. When I realized the connection, I respected her silence. The cafe around them continued its hushed symphony of conversations and clinking cups. But between them stretched the vast terrain of all that had been lost. Eleanor finally spoke of her gradual awakening to the magnitude of what she had sacrificed, not in a moment of passion, but across the accumulation of empty holidays, milestones unmarked. The slow torture of knowing her daughter's life continued. Without her witness, Marco had died 5 years ago, their passionate beginning having mellowed into comfortable companionship. Their years together had been rich with travel, art, and love, yet increasingly shadowed by what Eleanor had surrendered to claim that life. His final words to her had been an absolution and a challenge. The only unforgivable sin is not asking for forgiveness. As afternoon light slanted through the cafe windows, Katerina shared measured observations about Sophia, her perfectionism, her sensitivity to criticism, her extraordinary talent. She mentioned an upcoming recital where Sophia would perform a piece that had once been in Eleanor's ballet repertoire, Tchaikovsky's Pezzo Capriccioso. The coincidence seemed too perfect to be accidental, as if music itself were attempting to reconnect what had been broken. I cannot help you approach them, Katerina said finally, gathering her things. That would be a betrayal of my relationship with the family. But I cannot prevent you from attending a public recital either. Her eyes, faded but still sharp, held Eleanor's. Whatever you choose, remember that your desire for redemption must not eclipse their right to refuse it. Alone again, Eleanor walked Boston's familiar streets, now transformed by new buildings and changed storefronts. The city had evolved without her, just as her family had. Near the public garden, she passed a mother and daughter feeding ducks. Their easy laughter, a reminder of simple joys, forever altered by her choices. That night, in a gesture that felt both futile and necessary, Eleanor wrote a letter to Rebecca, not seeking justification or even forgiveness, but simply acknowledging the truth of what had happened and the consequences that had unfolded. She sealed it in an envelope she wasn't sure she would ever deliver. The act of writing itself a kind of reckoning. The recital hall hummed with anticipation. Parents and music enthusiasts filling the seats while young musicians adjusted bow ties and smoothed dresses backstage. Eleanor had chosen a seat near the exit, close enough to see clearly, but positioned for a quick departure if necessary. She wore a simple black dress and pearl earrings that had been a gift from Marco on their 20th anniversary. Her only concession to sentimentality. The program passed in a blur of talented youth until Sophia took the stage. The Tchaikovsky piece began with the cello's voice rising in melancholy beauty, a conversation between the instrument and the young woman who commanded it with such authority. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, transported to another time when she had danced to this same composition, her body telling the story that Sophia now expressed through her music. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself being observed. Michael Chen, Rebecca's husband, was looking directly at her from his seat in the front row, his expression unreadable. A moment of recognition passed between them, though they had never met. Something in Eleanor's focused attention on Sophia had caught his notice. Eleanor remained perfectly still, neither acknowledging nor denying her presence, her heart racing as Michael's attention returned to his daughter's performance. After the recital, Laner slipped out during the applause, unwilling to force an encounter for which no one was prepared. In the lobby, however, she nearly collided with Rebecca herself, who was stepping away from the crowd to answer a phone call. For one suspended moment, they stood face to face, mother and daughter, strangers connected by blood and divided by choices made before either fully understood their consequences. Rebecca's expression shifted from polite apology to shock, her phone lowering slowly as recognition dawned. Eleanor could see the 8-year-old girl beneath the composed facade of the accomplished woman before her, could see her own features reflected back like a ghost. "Rebecca," she said simply, her voice barely audible. Rebecca stared at her for one eternal moment before turning away without a word. "God, disappearing back into the reception area with rigid shoulders and quickened steps. Eleanor remained rooted to the spot, unsure if what had just occurred was progress or further damage. The encounter had lasted mere seconds, but it shattered the careful distance of decades. Later that week, a small package arrived at Eleanor's apartment, a USB drive with no note. Heart pounding, she plugged it into her laptop to discover recordings of Sophia's performances over the past 3 years, meticulously labeled and organized. The final file was named simply for Eleanor. It contained a recording of the Tchaikovsky piece from the recital. Michael. Chen had made the first tentative gesture toward connection. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of her existence and her right to know the granddaughter who shared her artistic soul. Eleanor played the recordings repeatedly, studying Sophia's technique, her musical interpretation. The small movements between notes that revealed personality and emotion. That night, Eleanor dreamed of dancing again, not as her younger self, but as she was now aged, body still remembering the joy of movement. In the dream, Sophia played while Eleanor danced, their art intertwining across generations. She woke with tears on her face, but also with a sense of possibility that had been absent for too long. The coffee shop was neutral territory, chosen deliberately for its anonymity. Eleanor arrived 30 minutes early, ordering tea she couldn't taste, and claiming a corner table that offered privacy without isolation. Precisely at the agreed time, she recognized him immediately from the recital distinguished. Composed, his academic background evident in his careful observation of surroundings before approaching her table. "Thank you for the recordings," Eleanor said, once pleasantries had been exchanged. Her hands wrapped around her cooling cup. "Sophia deserves to be known," he replied simply. Then, after a measured pause, "Rebecca doesn't know I'm here." The confession hung between them, both an offering and a boundary. Michael explained that he had recognized Eleanor at the recital not from photographs, but from Sophia's features, the distinctive shape of hands that he had seen in his daughter but never in his wife, the particular tilt of the head when concentrating deeply. "Rebecca has never spoken much about you," he continued, his tone neither accusatory nor sympathetic. "But absence speaks its own language. I've watched her check hospital records when we travel to Argentina. I've seen her search your name online. When she thinks no one is watching," Lenore absorbed this revelation with a complex mixture of pain and hope. Her daughter had not forgotten her, had perhaps even wondered about her fate during these silent decades. The knowledge was both balm and wound. Michael shared carefully selected details about Rebecca's life, her triumph, overperformance anxiety in her 20s, her dedication as a mother, her success as first chair cellist with the symphony. Spoke of Sophia's early musical aptitude, how she had gravitated toward the cello despite being offered piano lessons first. He mentioned that Sophia had been asking questions recently about her extended family, curious about her genetic inheritance of musical ability. "There's something you should know," he said finally, placing a small envelope on the table. "Rebecca was diagnosed with breast cancer last year. Early stage, excellent prognosis. But it forced certain conversations about family medical history conversations that were incomplete." Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for the envelope. Inside was a medical form requesting family health information. Rebecca's signature at the bottom alongside a date from 6 months earlier. It had never been sent. She couldn't bring herself to contact you directly, Michael explained. Pride, perhaps, or fear that you wouldn't respond. The irony was breathtaking that illness would create a bridge where love alone had failed. Eleanor provided what information she could, including her mother's death from ovarian cancer and her father's longevity despite heart disease. As she wrote, memories surfaced of holding Rebecca through childhood illnesses, the primal maternal fear when fever spiked or breathing labored before they parted. Michael hesitated, then offered a final insight. "Sophia, has your photograph?" "Rebecca keeps a small album hidden in her studio pictures from before. Our daughter found it last year and has been curious ever since." He left Eleanor with cautious instructions, a way to send a letter that might be read, a timeline for proceeding that respected Rebecca's recovery and emotional equilibrium. No promises were made except for honesty and care, Walking home along the Charles River, Eleanor was struck by autumn's transformation of the landscape, how leaves could change so dramatically before releasing their hold entirely. She thought about the photograph Michael had mentioned and wondered which version of herself her granddaughter had discovered: the young dancer, the troubled wife, or the mother who had not yet made the choice that would define the rest of their lives. The letter remained unsent for weeks, Eleanor revising it countless times until the words no longer made sense. What could be said after 34 years of silence? What explanation could possibly suffice? In the end, she wrote simply and directly about her life now, about seeing Sophia play, about medical information that might be relevant to Rebecca's treatment. She included her contact information and a small note for Sophia, not presuming a relationship but offering a connection if ever desired. Michael had instructed her to mail it to his office address, and so she did, releasing 3 decades of unspoken words into the postal system with trembling hands. The weeks that followed were exercises in patience and uncertainty. Eleanor continued her volunteer work at the library, reading to children with renewed energy, finding parallels between their stories and her own complicated narrative. 2 months after sending the letter, Eleanor's phone rang with an unknown number. When she answered, there was silence, then a young voice. "Is this Eleanor Wilson?" Sophia had made the decision independently, finding Eleanor's number in the letter her father had eventually shared. The conversation was awkward, stilted, both of them navigating unfamiliar emotional territory without maps. Sophia asked direct questions about Eleanor's dancing career, about genetic traits, about Argentina. She revealed little about her feelings regarding the discovery of a grandmother she had never known existed. "Mom doesn't know I'm calling," she admitted near the end of their conversation. "Dad says it's my choice, but ... What? But loyalty matters," Eleanor finished softly. "I understand that better than anyone." They agreed to exchange emails, a less immediate form of communication that would give both time to consider their words. Eleanor sensed that Sophia was acting partly from genuine curiosity and partly from the fearlessness of youth, unable to fully comprehend the complex history between her mother and grandmother. The first email arrived 3 days later, a recording of Sophia practicing a difficult passage, seeking Eleanor's perspective as a former performer. Not personal, not emotional, but a tentative bridge constructed of shared artistic understanding. Eleanor responded with technical observations and a story about stage fright before her first major role, a small offering of vulnerability. What Eleanor didn't share was how she sat in her apartment afterward, weeping with the strange joy of hearing her granddaughter address her directly, being asked for advice, of contributing even minutely to Sophia's development. It was more than she had allowed herself to hope for. As their correspondence continued, Eleanor maintained absolute transparency with Michael, forwarding their exchanges with Sophia's knowledge. She respected the boundaries established, never asking about Rebecca directly, never pushing for more than was freely offered. The discipline required was exhausting, but necessary. Trust, once shattered, could not be demanded but only earned through consistent respect. One evening, Eleanor received an unexpected email containing a single video attachment. With nervous anticipation, she clicked play to discover Rebecca performing with the symphony, recorded from the audience 3 weeks earlier. The sender was Sophia, the message simple. "I thought you might want to see this." Eleanor watched her daughter command the stage with grace and confidence, her expression transported as she played. The years between them dissolved momentarily as she recognized Rebecca's gestures. Her posture, elements of the little girl she had left behind, now woven into the accomplished woman on screen. What Sophia could not possibly understand was the magnitude of this gift, not just seeing Rebecca perform, but knowing that her daughter was aware of the sharing. Wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement. For now, that would have to be enough. Winter descended on Boston with characteristic ferocity, snow transforming the city into something both familiar and strange. Much like Eleanor's evolving relationship with Sophia, their emails had developed a comfortable rhythm, primarily focused on music but occasionally venturing into more personal territory. Sophia shared details about her preparations for Juilliard, her anxieties about leaving home, her excitement about New York City. Eleanor offered experiences from her own artistic journey, careful to distinguish between guidance and intrusion. The weekend before Christmas, Eleanor's phone lit up with an unexpected message from Michael. Rebecca has agreed to meet. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the MFA, Impressionist Gallery. The Museum of Fine Arts had been a frequent destination during Rebecca's childhood. Sunday afternoons spent wandering among masterpieces, Rebecca sketching in a small notebook while Eleanor pointed out details of composition and color. That Michael had chosen this location seemed deliberate, neutral, yet layered with meaning. Eleanor arrived early, her reflection in the museum windows revealing her nervousness in the slight disarray of her normally impeccable appearance. She wandered through familiar galleries until she reached the Impressionists, where Monet's water lilies bloomed in perpetual summer despite the snow falling outside. When Rebecca appeared, she moved with the same purposeful grace that had characterized her as a child. She acknowledged Eleanor with a slight nod before turning toward a Degas painting of ballet dancers, perhaps another intentional choice, a recognition of their shared history. Sophia says you've been helpful with her cello technique, Rebecca said finally, her voice controlled, professionally pleasant. She mentions your emails. She's extraordinarily talented, Eleanor replied, careful to match her daughter's measured tone. But you know that. Yes. A pause, heavy with unspoken history. Michael thinks I should tell you that my treatment has been successful. The doctors are optimistic. The information was delivered without emotion, yet the fact of its sharing was significant. Eleanor exhaled slowly, relief flooding through her. I'm very glad to hear that. They moved through the gallery with careful distance between them, discussing art with the polite interest of acquaintances. Anyone observing would never guess at the visceral connection between them, biological and emotional threads that pulled taut with every step. Near the end of their circumscribed visit, Becca stopped before a small Cassatt painting depicting a mother and daughter in intimate conversation. You left us a week before my 9th birthday, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the artwork. Dad said you weren't coming back, but I saved you a piece of cake anyway. I kept it in the refrigerator until it went moldy. The simple detail, a child's stubborn hope preserved in spoiling cake, canged at Eleanor more thoroughly than any recrimination. Could've? Her carefully maintained composure faltered, tears welling despite her determination to remain collected. I have no defense, she admitted. I could tell you about unhappiness and passion and feeling trapped, but in the end, I made a choice that hurt you immeasurably. Nothing I say now can change that. Rebecca nodded once sharply. No, it can't. She turned away from the painting, her expression composed once more. Sophia wants to invite you to her graduation showcase before she leaves for Juilliard. Thinks it's appropriate? I, am not opposed. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't even warmth, but it was permission to exist at the periphery of their lives. Eleanor recognized the monumental effort this concession must have required from Rebecca, the setting aside of justified anger to accommodate her daughter's wishes. Thank you, she said simply. As they prepared to part ways, Rebecca hesitated, then reached into her bag. These might help fill in some gaps for Sophia's medical history, she said, handing over a manila envelope. Family records, genetic information, things she might need someday. The practical excuse for this exchange of information didn't disguise, if not yet, in their emotional one. It was a beginning, tentative and fragile. They said goodbye without embracing, without promises of future contact. But as Eleanor watched her daughter walk away through the museum's grand entrance, she felt something shift between them, not healing, exactly, but perhaps the first acknowledgement that healing might someday be possible. Spring arrived in Boston, with characteristic unpredictability, sunshine and frost, alternating like emotional states. Elena found herself increasingly involved in Sophia's preparation for her showcase, offering technical advice via email and occasionally through video calls. These digital connections were supervised at first, Michael's presence a reassuring boundary for all involved. But gradually he stepped away. Trusting the established parameters of their relationship, Sophia's curiosity about Eleanor's life had expanded beyond music to include questions about her childhood, her training, Her travels with Marco, Eleanor answered carefully, never disparaging Rebecca or Thomas, framing her choices as her own failures rather than reactions to circumstances. When Sophia asked directly why she had left, Eleanor redirected her gently. That's a conversation for your mother to participate in if she ever chooses. The invitation to Sophia's graduation showcase arrived by mail, a formal card with Eleanor's name carefully printed, not an afterthought, but not integrated with the family either. The location was significant. The same recital hall where Eleanor had first seen Sophia perform, where she had briefly encountered Rebecca after decades of separation. On the evening of the showcase, Eleanor dressed with particular care, selecting a deep blue dress that complemented without drawing attention. She brought a small gift of vintage music box that played Tchaikovsky, one of the few treasures she had carried with her from her previous life. Its value was sentimental rather than monetary, something she hoped would communicate sincerity. Rather than attempted compensation, the recital hall was crowded with proud families and discerning music faculty. Eleanor spotted Rebecca and Michael in the front row, speaking with an older gentleman who appeared to be a Juilliard representative. She took her assigned seat several rows behind them. Close enough to be present, distant enough to respect. Invisible boundaries. When Sophia performed, the audience fell into reverent silence. Eleanor watched her granddaughter's face as she played, recognizing the total immersion that came from surrendering oneself completely to music. It was an expression she had seen in old photographs of herself performing, an inheritance more profound than physical features. After the showcase, a small reception was held in an adjoining room. Eleanor hung back, uncertain of protocol in this delicate new arrangement. Sophia solved the dilemma by approaching directly, accepting compliments on her performance with gracious nods before reaching Eleanor. "You came," she said simply, her smile genuine, if slightly reserved. "I wouldn't have missed it," Eleanor replied, offering the small wrapped package. "A small tradition in my family, my mother gave me a music box before my first major performance." Sophia unwrapped it carefully, her expression softening as the familiar melody emerged. "I know," Eleanor acknowledged. Some connections persist despite everything. They were joined by Michael, whose cordial greeting indicated planned inclusion rather than coincidental encounter. He mentioned that several faculty members wanted to speak with Sophia, gently guiding the conversation toward a natural conclusion. As Eleanor prepared to leave, he added quietly, "Rebecca thought you might join us for dinner next week. Something small, just family." The words hung in the air between them. Just family, tentative reconnaissance into territory long abandoned. Eleanor accepted with measured gratitude, understanding both the opportunity and responsibility such an invitation represented. Later that evening, as she prepared for bed, Eleanor noticed a text message from an unknown number. "Thank you for coming tonight and for the music box." Or 2 sentences, 26 characters, including spaces and punctuation. Not an emotional reconciliation, not explicit forgiveness. But Rebecca had reached out directly for the first time in 34 years, had acknowledged Eleanor's presence at an important family event, had referred to herself with the initial that connected them. Eleanor typed and deleted several responses before settling on simplicity. "She played beautifully. Thank you for allowing me to be there." Outside her window, spring rain washed the city streets, carrying away winter's remaining debris. Eleanor thought about the dinner invitation, about sitting at a table with the family she had fractured and abandoned. There would be awkward silences, careful navigation of conversational landmines, perhaps moments of unexpected connection. It would not be easy or comfortable, but it would be a beginning, a chance to know her granddaughter, and perhaps someday to rebuild something with her daughter. The rain continued through the night, nourishing seeds long dormant beneath the soil, preparing them for eventual emergence into light. The restaurant was Eleanor's choice, a small Italian place in the north, and that hadn't existed during her previous life in Boston. Neutral territory was essential for this first family dinner, somewhere without layered memories or associations. She arrived early, securing a corner table that offered both privacy and easy conversation. Ordering a bottle of wine to be opened and breathing before their arrival. When Rebecca, Michael and Sophia entered, Eleanor was struck by their cohesion. As a Unit 3 people who moved in unconscious harmony, accustomed to occupying space together, she rose to greet them, accepting Michael's warm handshake, Sophia's brief hug, Rebecca's polite nod. The early moments were awkward. Conversation limited to comments about traffic and weather until the waiter's arrival created welcome distraction as they ordered. Eleanor noticed Sophia sneaking glances between her and Rebecca, clearly searching for similarities and connections. Young woman's curiosity was natural, but her awareness of the tension was evident in her slightly excessive cheerfulness, her determined efforts to maintain conversation flow. Sophia tells me you've been helping her with performance anxiety techniques, Rebecca said eventually, her tone neutral, but not cold. The breathing exercises seemed to be working. They were taught to me by my first ballet instructor, Eleanor explained. I've used them throughout my life, not just for performances. A small, personal revelation that these techniques had traveled with Eleanor beyond dance, into other aspects of her existence. Rebecca absorbed this with a slight nod, perhaps filing away this fragment of her mother's life during the missing decades. The dinner progressed with careful conversation, centered on Sophia's upcoming move to New York and the practical aspects of her education. As dessert was served, Amiko mentioned a storage problem in their basement, boxes of old records and memorabilia that needed sorting before Sophia's departure. Mom has all these vinyl albums from the 70s, Sophia explained, but she never plays them. They're just collecting dust. Those were your grandfather's, Rebecca said quietly. He collected jazz records. I couldn't. She stopped, something vulnerable crossing her face before she regained composure. Thomas loved Oscar Peterson, Eleanor said softly. He had everything Peterson ever recorded. The simple observation, this shared knowledge of the man who had connected them created a momentary bridge across decades. Rebecca's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, surprise at Eleanor's accurate memory, perhaps mingling with unwanted nostalgia. I could help sort through them, Eleanor offered carefully. That would be useful. The suggestion hung in the air, its implications expanding beyond vinyl records to potentially include photographs, mementos, tangible pieces of their shared past that had been divided but not destroyed. Rebecca studied her wine glass, considering. It might be helpful, actually, she conceded, eventually. There are some items I'm not sure what to do with. Plans were made for Eleanor to visit their home the following weekend, a monumental step into territory that had been forbidden for decades. As they paid the bill and prepared to leave, Sophia mentioned her summer plans, which included a music festival in the Berkshires. Grandma, she began, then hesitated, glancing at Rebecca. Eleanor was telling me about performing there in the 60s. The slip, the first time Sophia had used the term grandma, created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Rebecca's posture stiffened slightly, while Eleanor tried to maintain a neutral expression despite the flood of emotion the word evoked. It's fine, Rebecca said after a moment, addressing her daughter directly. She is your grandmother. We're all adults here. The acknowledgement, simple, direct, undeniable, was perhaps the most significant moment of the evening. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation, but recognition of biological truth and familial connection that could not be erased regardless of past actions. Outside the restaurant, goodbyes were exchanged with slightly less formality than greetings had been. As Eleanor watched them walk away, Sophia between her parents with one hand linked through her mother's arm, she noticed something that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Rebecca's free hand occasionally rose to touch a pendant around her neck, small silver ballet slipper that Eleanor had given her for her 8th birthday. The last gift before everything changed. Some connections, it seemed, remained intact despite decades of silence and separation. Whether by conscious choice or unconscious habit, Rebecca had preserved this small token of their earlier life together. In that tiny detail, Eleanor found a fragile thread of hope that perhaps not everything had been severed after all. The Chen family home in Cambridge was a Victorian, painted in muted blues and creams, surrounded by carefully tended gardens just beginning to bloom. Eleanor hesitated on the sidewalk, the weight of entering this space, her daughter's sanctuary, suddenly overwhelming. This was Rebecca's carefully constructed life. The home where she had raised Sophia without Eleanor's presence or influence. Crossing this threshold felt monumental in ways Eleanor hadn't fully anticipated. Michael answered the door, his warm greeting easing some of her apprehension. He led her through the house tour that revealed rooms filled with books and music, photographs of family vacations, Sophia's cello positioned prominently in the living room. The house told the story of a family bound by shared experiences and genuine affection. A life built on stable foundations, unlike Eleanor's own fractured history. In the basement, cardboard boxes lined metal shelving units, each labeled with Rebecca's precise handwriting. Thomas's records, family photos, pre-1985, Rebecca's childhood taxonomies of a life abandoned and preserved simultaneously. Michael helped Eleanor move several boxes to a folding table before excusing himself, leaving her alone among the physical artifacts of the past. Eleanor had just begun examining the first box of vinyl records when footsteps on the stairs announced Rebecca's arrival. Her daughter stood at the bottom of the staircase, arms crossed defensively across her chest, observing Eleanor with complex emotions shadowing her features. "Dad's jazz collection," she said, nodding toward the open box. "I could never bring myself to play them after he died, but I couldn't get rid of them either." Eleanor nodded, understanding entirely the complicated relationship between objects and memory. She handled a worn Oscar Peterson album gently, remembering Thomas playing it on Sunday mornings. Newspapers spread across the breakfast table, Rebecca building towers with toast crusts. "He died 15 years ago," Rebecca continued, moving further into the room but maintaining distance. "Heart attack while arguing a case in court. Very dramatic. Very Thomas." The information was delivered flatly, but Eleanor recognized the offering it represented. Rebecca, sharing details of a pivotal life event Eleanor had not been present to witness. She acknowledged the loss with appropriate gravity, noting Thomas's relatively young age at death, resisting the urge to offer belated condolences that would likely feel hollow after so much time. They worked in silence for nearly an hour, sorting records into keep and donate piles according to Rebecca's occasional instructions. The methodical task provided structure to their uncomfortable proximity, allowing them to interact without direct confrontation. Occasionally, their hands would reach for the same album, causing momentary tension before one would withdraw. When they reached the box labeled family photos, Rebecca hesitated visibly. "We can leave these for another time," Eleanor offered, but Rebecca shook her head. "Sophia's been asking about them. Might as well." She left the sentence unfinished, removing the lid to reveal neatly organized photo albums and loose photographs, spanning decades. Together, they examined images of Rebecca's childhood birthday parties Eleanor had attended, school events she had missed, Rebecca as a teenager, her expression guarded in the years following the abandonment, college graduation, with Thomas beaming proudly beside her, wedding photos with Michael, Caribbean honeymoon, Sophia's birth announcement. Among these chronological markers of Rebecca's life, Eleanor noticed something curious. Photographs of herself had not been removed or destroyed. In family pictures, from before the separation, her image remained intact, neither cut out nor defaced. It was a small mercy she hadn't expected, physical preservation of her existence, even as her actual presence had been eliminated. "I thought about burning them," Rebecca admitted, following Eleanor's gaze to a particular Christmas photo where they wore matching red dresses. "But that seemed like something from a bad movie. Besides, they weren't just pictures of you, they were pieces of my history too." The simple statement contained profound awareness, recognition that their stories were inextricably connected despite the rupture. That erasing Eleanor completely would have required Rebecca to erase parts of herself as well. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something equally valuable: acknowledgement of their permanent, if damaged, connection. As they continued sorting, Rebecca occasionally shared anecdotes connected to particular items: Sophia's first cello recital, Thomas teaching her to drive, the summer spent restoring the Victorian house. These stories were delivered without emotional emphasis, yet Eleanor understood them as deliberate inclusions. Pieces of the life she had missed being carefully curated and shared near the bottom of a box. Rebecca paused, lifting out a small, battered jewelry box. "I thought this was lost," she said quietly, opening it to reveal a child's bracelet with ballet charms. "You gave me this when I got the part of a mouse in the Nutcracker." Eleanor remembered the moment with perfect clarity. Rebecca's excitement at her first real role, tiny face alight with pride as Eleanor fastened the bracelet around her wrist. The memory hung between them, simultaneously connecting and separating. "You were so determined to practice until midnight," Eleanor recalled softly. "Your father had to carry you to bed when you fell asleep in your costume, for the first time." Rebecca's expression softened into something approaching a genuine smile. "I was stubborn." "You were passionate," Eleanor corrected. "There's a difference." The distinction seemed to resonate with Rebecca, who studied the bracelet thoughtfully before placing it in the keep pile. This small object had survived Eleanor's departure, Rebecca's justified anger. Decades of silence, a tangible reminder of something positive they had once shared. As afternoon light began to fade, they had made surprising progress through the basement archives. Rebecca checked her watch, mentioning dinner preparations and Sophia's impending return from a friend's house. The dismissal was polite, but clear Eleanor's allotted time in this sanctuary was ending. At the front door, Rebecca hesitated, clearly wrestling with something internal before speaking. "Sophia's birthday is next month. We're having a small celebration here before she leaves for Juilliard. If you'd like to come." Invitation was delivered without warmth, but with definite intention. Eleanor accepted with appropriate gratitude. Understanding both the magnitude of this inclusion and its boundaries, as she turned to leave, Rebecca spoke again, her voice carrying a quality Eleanor hadn't heard in decades. Vulnerability, barely contained beneath practiced control. "I have questions," she said simply. "Not today, but someday. About why. About what happened after. I think I deserve those answers." Eleanor nodded, throat tight with emotion. "Whenever you're ready, I'll tell you everything." It was not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but it was the possibility of understanding. The first tentative steps toward a conversation 3 decades overdue. As Eleanor walked back to her car, she felt something shift within her, the burden of unspoken truths beginning to lighten in anticipation of finally being released. Sophia's birthday celebration was intimate. Grandparents from Michael's side, few close friends, former teachers, including Katerina Petrova, whose knowing glance acknowledged Eleanor's presence without drawing attention to its significance. The garden had been transformed with strings of lights and paper lanterns, a tableau of normalized family life into which Eleanor had been cautiously admitted. Eleanor had agonized over an appropriate gift, ultimately selecting a vintage music manuscript with handwritten notations by a renowned cellist, valuable to someone with Sophia's interests, but not extravagant enough to suggest compensation for lost years. She presented it alongside other gifts, relieved when Sophia's enthusiasm seemed genuine rather than performative. Throughout the evening, Eleanor observed the dynamics of this family. She had been absent from how Rebecca instinctively anticipated. Michael's movements in the kitchen, how Sophia's lot mirrored her mother's, how Michael's parents treated Rebecca as their own daughter rather than an in-law. These were the intangible bonds formed through shared experiences and consistent presence. Connections Eleanor could admire, but never fully share. As cake was served, Rebecca unexpectedly took the seat beside Eleanor, their shoulders almost touching. As they watched Sophia enthusiastically describe her upcoming move to New York, the proximity was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, simply unprecedented in their carefully choreographed interactions. "She reminds me of you at that age," Rebecca said quietly, eyes fixed on her daughter. "The absolute certainty that music is everything. I never had that kind of focus." Eleanor considered this comparison a validation of connection between generations. That had seemed impossible. "You had it for photography," she replied. "I remember the darkroom we set up in the bathroom. You were so determined to get the perfect print you missed dinner." The shared memory hung between them, neither rejected nor embraced. Rebecca sipped her wine thoughtfully, then added, "She has your hands. Everyone always comments on it. Long fingers, strong wrists." These observations, delivered without emotion but heavy with implication, represented significant movement in their fragile relationship. Rebecca was acknowledging biological inheritance, physical and temperamental threads connecting Eleanor to Sophia despite the intervening absence. Later, as guests began departing, Eleanor found herself alone with Rebecca in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher in companionable silence. The domestic scene was surreal in its ordinariness. This simple task performed together after decades of separation. "I have an album," Eleanor said suddenly, the words emerging before she had fully considered them. "Photographs from Argentina. From my life there, things Sophia has asked about. Would you want to see them first, before I share them with her?" The offer represented both transparency and deference to Rebecca's maternal authority. Eleanor was not attempting to create a separate relationship with Sophia that excluded Rebecca, but rather inviting her daughter into the narrative, offering her first review of the stories that had unfolded during their separation. Rebecca considered this, methodically arranging plates in the dishwasher. "Bring them next time," she said finally. "We'll look at them together." Next time, two simple words that implied continuation. Future interactions not yet scheduled but anticipated nonetheless. Eleanor nodded, accepting both the permission and its boundaries with equal gratitude as she prepared to leave. Sophia embraced her warmly, whispering thanks for coming, Grandma, with unguarded affection. The title, now used deliberately rather than accidentally, still felt foreign but welcome. A designation Eleanor had forfeited decades ago, suddenly restored through the generosity of a granddaughter. Determined to know her, Rebecca's goodbye was more reserved but no less significant. A slight touch on Eleanor's arm, brief eye contact, a nod that communicated acknowledgement, if not yet forgiveness. Small gestures accumulating like individual notes, gradually forming a melody. The composition still incomplete, but recognizable in its emerging pattern. Driving home through nighttime Boston, Eleanor reflected on the evening's subtle victories being included in family photographs. Hearing Rebecca recall shared memories without immediate bitterness. Witnessing Sophia's comfortable use of Grandma in Rebecca's presence without correction. These were modest developments, measured against 3 decades of absence, yet significant in their traversal of emotional territory, once thought permanently inaccessible. At home, Kioneska removed a photograph from her bedside drawer, Marco in their Buenos Aires apartment, smiling at the camera she held. She studied his face, remembering their passionate beginning, their comfortable middle years, their peaceful end. She had loved him completely, and that love had cost her everything else she valued. "I still don't know if it was worth it," she whispered to his image. "But I'm trying to repair what can be repaired." The impossible calculation weighing decades of love against decades of loss had no mathematical solution. But as she replaced the photograph in its drawer, Eleanor felt something shifting within her perspective. Perhaps there was no longer a need to justify or condemn the choice made by her younger self. Perhaps the only relevant question now was how her present self would honor the unexpected opportunity for connection she had been granted. The weeks leading to Sophia's departure for Juilliard accelerated with the inevitable momentum of significant life transitions. Eleanor had been included in several family gatherings, always with clearly defined parameters, always with the understanding that her presence was a privilege rather than a right. She had shown Rebecca the photographs from Argentina as promised, explaining contexts and histories while her daughter listened with composed but genuine interest. On a warm August afternoon, Eleanor received an unexpected call from Rebecca asking if she was available to help Sophia pack her cello for transport to New York. The request, practical, yet intimate, suggested a level of trust that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Eleanor arrived at the Cambridge house to find organized chaos, suitcases open on every surface, Sophia alternating between excitement and last-minute panic, while Michael and Rebecca sorted through financial documents for the semester. Alano carefully wrapped Sophia's cello in specialized materials, demonstrating techniques she had used for transporting fragile instruments during her touring years. The process was methodical, almost meditative, grandmother and granddaughter working in harmonious concentration. "Mom's worried about me being alone in New York," Sophia confided, securing latches on the custom case. "She thinks I'm not ready." "Your mother worries because she loves you," Eleanor replied, smoothing protective fabric with practiced hands. When you love someone, you imagine all the ways they might be hurt. The observation hung between them, its application to their complex family situation obvious though unspoken. Sophia considered this while adjusting padding around the cello's neck. "She kept all your letters, you know," she said suddenly. "The ones you sent after you left. She has them in a box in her closet. I found them when I was little, but I didn't understand what they were until recently." The revelation stunned Eleanor into momentary silence. She had written faithfully for years, birthdays, Christmases, school graduations, calculated from afar never, knowing if the letters were read or immediately discarded. To learn they had been preserved, kept close in Rebecca's private space, suggested a connection maintained, despite active rejection of contact. "Does she know you found them?" Eleanor asked carefully. Sophia nodded. "We talked about it last week. She said she was never as angry as she pretended to be. Just hurt. Really, really hurt." The distinction seemed critical, and could burn itself out eventually, but deep hurt could calcify into permanent emotional scar tissue. That Rebecca had communicated this to her daughter, rather than maintaining a simplified narrative of abandonment, suggested emotional processing long hidden from Eleanor's view. Later, as final preparations were completed, Rebecca asked Eleanor to help sort through Sophia's childhood music books, determining which to keep for sentimental reasons, which to donate to the community music school. They worked companionably in Sophia's, gradually emptying bedroom, the task providing structure for their still awkward interaction. "I never told you congratulations," Rebecca said suddenly, examining a beginner's cello book with faded margin notes. "About your marriage to Marco. I saw the announcement in an international arts publication years ago." The acknowledgement delivered. Without eye contact, fingers tracing old pencil markings represented significant emotional evolution. Rebecca was recognizing the relationship that had triggered their separation as legitimate, worthy of conventional acknowledgement rather than perpetual condemnation. "Thank you," Eleanor replied simply, understanding both what was being offered and its limitations. He was a good man, despite how everything began. Rebecca nodded once, sharply, before changing the subject to Sophia's upcoming orientation schedule. The moment passed without further exploration, but its occurrence alone marked territory previously thought uninhabitable. The day of Sophia's departure arrived with emotional intensity that transcended ordinary goodbyes. Eleanor had been explicitly included in the family's private farewell, breakfast and invitation that acknowledged her place in Sophia's expanding life story. As they prepared to leave for the airport, Sophia distributed handwritten notes to each family member, explaining that they should be read after she departed, at the terminal gate. Final embraces were exchanged, Sophia clinging first to her parents, then turning to Eleanor with equal emotion. "I'll call when I get settled," she promised, briefly uniting 3 generations of women in her youthful determination to maintain connections. Despite distance, when the family returned to the now quieter house, Rebecca surprised Eleanor by inviting her to stay for coffee rather than making polite excuses for her departure. In the kitchen scene of countless family moments Eleanor had missed, they opened Sophia's notes with the careful reverence such communications deserved. Eleanor's contained affectionate gratitude for technical music advice and being patient while we all figured this out. Rebecca's, glimpsed briefly before being tucked away, appeared longer and more emotionally detailed. Whatever Sophia had written caused Rebecca to turn away momentarily, composing herself before rejoining their subdued conversation. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Rebecca hesitated by the front door, clearly struggling with something unspoken. Finally, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small envelope, passing it to Eleanor with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Sophia found these when we were packing," she explained. "She thought you might want them." Inside were 2 photographs. Eleanor had never seen Rebecca holding newborn Sophia in the hospital. In a more recent image of Rebecca performing with the symphony, captured in a moment of complete immersion in the music. These private moments when Eleanor should have witnessed as a grandmother, one she should have attended as a mother, had been deliberately shared, not to inflict pain but to include her in what had been missed. "Thank you," Eleanor said, unable to fully articulate the significance of this offering. Rebecca nodded, her expression softening marginally. Sophia thinks we're more alike than either of us wants to admit. She might be right. The observation, delivered without accusation or bitterness, suggested a perspective that had evolved beyond simple victim-perpetrator classifications. Rebecca was acknowledging complexities in their shared history, recognizing patterns and parallels that defied simplistic moral assignments. As Eleanor walked to her car, she felt something shift between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The photographs in her purse represented not just captured moments, but bridges between separate lives. Tentative connections across a chasm that had once seemed permanently unbridgeable. That evening, Eleanor placed the new photographs alongside others in her apartment. A visual timeline now expanded to include fragments of the life she had missed. The images were both gift and challenge, recognition of her grandmother's status alongside reminders of its belated establishment. But the fact of their giving represented hope that had seemed impossible mere months ago. Hope that some broken things, while never returning to their original form, might eventually be reconstructed into something new and unexpectedly valuable. Winter returned to Boston, completing a full cycle of seasons since Eleanor had first glimpsed Sophia performing in the recital hall. The year had brought changes that once would have seemed impossible: regular video calls with Sophia from Juilliard, occasional coffees with Rebecca that, while not entirely comfortable, no longer carried crippling tension, even a surprising friendship with Michael, who sometimes sought Eleanor's perspective on supporting female musicians through performance challenges. Eleanor had continued her volunteer work at the library, but had expanded her role to include organizing a senior ballet, exercise class, gentle movements adapted for aging bodies that nevertheless honored the discipline and artistry of dance. Rebecca had attended one session, observing silently from the back, before leaving without comment. 2 weeks later, a small donation had been made to the program in the Wilson Chan family name. On a snowy December morning, Eleanor received an unexpected text from Rebecca. Mom might be having minor surgery next week. Nothing serious, routine procedure. Thought you should know. The message contained multiple layers of significance beyond its practical information. Rebecca had referred to Eleanor as mom for the first time since reconnection. She had voluntarily shared medical information without being asked. Most importantly, she had recognized Eleanor's right to know about her health, and acknowledgement of familial connection that transcended their complicated history. Eleanor responded with appropriate concern and offers of assistance, careful not to overstate her role or expectations. Rebecca's reply was brief but consequential. Thanks, we'll keep you updated. Later that week, a heavy manila envelope arrived at Eleanor's apartment with Rebecca's return address. Inside, she found legal documents with a post-it note attached. Sophia insisted. Michael agrees. Your choice entirely. The papers were medical power of attorney and healthcare proxy forms, listing Eleanor as the tertiary contact after Michael and Sophia, but before more distant relatives. Rebecca was formally acknowledging Eleanor's place in the family structure, creating official documentation of their reconnection after decades of legal separation. Eleanor signed the forms with steady hands, understanding both the practical and symbolic significance of this inclusion. She returned them with a simple note. Thank you for trusting me with this responsibility. As Christmas approached, the inevitable question of holiday arrangements emerged. Eleanor had made no assumptions, prepared to spend the day as she had, for decades, with community service, followed by quiet reflection. Instead, she received a call from Michael, extending an invitation to Christmas Eve dinner, and if she was comfortable, attendance at Sophia's return performance with her youth orchestra on Christmas afternoon. Rebecca suggested it, he added, anticipating her unspoken question. Actually, it was her idea entirely. The Christmas Eve gathering was small, just the core family, plus Eleanor and Katerina Petrova. His presence provided both musical connection and a buffer of professional familiarity. The evening proceeded with surprising ease, conversation flowing more naturally than in previous encounters. Occasional references to shared history emerging without immediate tension. After dinner, Rebecca disappeared briefly into her study, returning with a small wrapped package that she placed on the coffee table in front of Eleanor without ceremony. It's not much, she said, resuming her seat beside Michael on the sofa. "Just something I thought you might like to have." Eleanor unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a handcrafted photo album. Inside were copies of family photographs spanning the past 25 years, Rebecca's adult life, her marriage, Sophia's childhood. The collection was clearly curated, selective rather than comprehensive. But it offered visual access to milestones Eleanor had missed: Sophia losing her first tooth, Rebecca receiving a music award, family vacations, and ordinary moments preserved in image. "Sophia helped me put it together," Rebecca explained, watching Eleanor's face carefully. "She thought you might like to fill in some of the gaps." The gift represented more than photographs. It was Rebecca actively participating in bridging the years of separation, offering tangible connection to the life that had continued in Eleanor's absence. Not forgetting or dismissing the abandonment, but choosing to share despite it. "Thank you," Eleanor said simply, understanding that no words could adequately express the significance of this offering. Later, as the evening wound down, Eleanor found herself briefly alone with Rebecca in the kitchen. The familiar parallel activity of cleanup, creating space for conversation without direct confrontation. "The surgery is scheduled for January 10th, Rebecca said, methodically loading the dishwasher. "Just outpatient. Michael will drive me." "I could bring dinner afterward," Eleanor offered cautiously. "Or help with anything else you need." Rebecca considered this, her movements slowing, though she didn't look up. "That would be ... helpful. Thank you." The exchange was mundane on its surface, practical arrangements between family members during minor medical situations. But beneath the ordinary words lay extraordinary development. Rebecca accepting assistance from the mother who had once abandoned her, allowing Eleanor to provide care, rather than maintaining complete self-sufficiency in her presence. As Christmas Eve ended and goodbyes were exchanged, Rebecca's embrace was brief but genuine, the first physical contact initiated between them since reconnection. Not the demonstrative affection they had once shared, but no longer the careful distance of formal acquaintances either. The following afternoon, Eleanor sat beside Michael and Rebecca in the concert hall, watching Sophia perform with her youth orchestra before departing for her return to Juilliard. The young woman's talent remained exceptional, her confidence visibly grown even in the few months since beginning her professional training, as the familiar strains of Tchaikovsky, the same composer whose music had accompanied Eleanor's dancing career, filled the hall. Eleanor glanced sideways at Rebecca. Her daughter's expression, as she watched Sophia perform, contained unmistakable pride, but also something more complex: awareness of artistic inheritance passing through generations. Musical aptitude flowing from grandmother to granddaughter. Despite the intervening rupture, Rebecca seemed to sense Eleanor's gaze, turning slightly to meet it. No words were exchanged, no dramatic gesture of reconciliation occurred. Simply acknowledgement of shared presence, shared bloodline, shared appreciation for the young woman whose existence connected them permanently, regardless of past choices. Later, as they gathered in the lobby with other proud families, a photographer from the music program approached, asking to take a picture of Sophia with her family. Without hesitation, Rebecca positioned herself beside Michael, then gestured for Eleanor to join them, a physical manifestation of tentative reintegration, captured in an image that would document this new configuration of family in the photograph. Later framed on Sophia's dormitory wall at Juilliard, 3 generations stood together, not with the easy intimacy of uninterrupted relationship, but with the hard-earned connection of those who had lost and found each other across decades of separation. Their smiles reflected different journeys to this moment. Sophia's uncomplicated joy, Michael's steady supportiveness, Rebecca's complex blend of residual hurt and emerging acceptance, Eleanor's profound gratitude for inclusion once thought impossible. As winter sunlight slanted through the concert hall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories in the air between them, Eleanor realized that there would never be complete resolution to their story. The years lost could not be recovered. The pain inflicted could not be erased. But perhaps completion was not the most important goal. Perhaps the willingness to remain present in the fragile, imperfect reconnection, to acknowledge both damage and possibility was itself a form of grace. Neither of them had anticipated finding in the gentle weight of Rebecca's hand briefly touching her shoulder as they listened to Sophia's music soaring toward the ceiling. Eleanor found something that felt, if not like forgiveness, then remarkably like peace.